It took me a little bit, but I finally figured out how to play the monk in Path of Exile 2. Now, if you followed along with my channel, or at least my journey in Path of Exile 1 or 2, you know that I don't have as much time playing the game as everyone else does. I only put in about 40 hours.
I gotta pump those numbers up. Those are rookie numbers in this racket.
Which for me is quite a bit in the time that it's been in early access. As I've been going through the main campaign, I'm just about to finish Act 3 on the cruel difficulty and get into mapping. I've been taking my time, trying to absorb the game as best I can, figure things out, not trying to blast all the way through it, but it wasn't always this way. Currently, I'm cruising through the second half of the campaign, however, this wasn't always the case. Up until about Act 3 on the first go-around, I was moving very slow, and I didn't figure out what was wrong until I fought this boss here. So let me go ahead and talk about what that moment was and how I got there. So as a preference, I try not to spoil myself with anything. I haven't looked at any of the preliminary content that was coming out about Path of Exile 2. I kind of kept myself spoiler-free, and that's because I like to go in and experience it myself before I form my own opinion. I don't like to essentially research everything that's going to happen and all the cool things that are going on until I actually get into the game. Now, that's just my personal preference, and it also makes it for a much slower, more deliberate learning process. However, that's just how I learn. I like the puzzle. And understanding what Path of Exile 1 was and understanding your character DPS chart and how to read that and all the different things that go into it, I was taking my time. And as I was taking my time, for the longest time, up until about Act 3, I was only using my basic attack as my primary damage dealer. Because when I read the damage tooltip and I saw the DPS number, I saw that it was doing, 1000 DPS or 800 DPS or however much it was. And it was significantly higher than any of the other abilities, the skill gems that I was using. So in my mind, I was like, this is what has to work. Now, granted, it did work for the first bit, and Act 2 ended up giving me quite a bit of trouble, especially with the Abomination, the end boss, because I just really was just getting slapped before I had a chance to get all of the DPS out. And it's not to say that my basic attacks weren't bad. It was doing okay, it was sufficient. However, I hit a wall. Now, that wall came in Act 3, and if I'm already saying Act 3, I'm sure that quite a few of you already know exactly what I'm talking about. The Molten Forge boss, or the Molten Gold boss, whatever you want to call him, his mechanics aren't necessarily that difficult, but there is kind of a DPS timer. Now, I've seen some other videos after I've already defeated him of what you could do. You could like run him down all the way to the other end of the room and DPS him there, and it causes him to like not be able to be empowered by molten gold or what have you. I didn't end up going through that. All I ended up doing was trying to throw my face up against the wall and defeat this one boss over and over using only my basic attacks. Only my basic attacks. And after, I don't know, probably about like 15 attempts, I could not figure out for the life of me how to defeat this guy. I was just not doing enough DPS. So when you faced a problem, what do? You try to figure out how to make it work. And I decided that I would try Tempest Flurry. I liked the motions of it, although whenever I looked at the DPS was always significantly lower, by like 20% of my basic attack. So I said, why would this be even worth it? Well, I tried Tempest Flurry, and without me even using Charged Staff or anything like that, the combination of Tempest Flurry and then the Bell was enough to absolutely obliterate it. After I started pumping out a lot of those numbers, I realized that I was doing quite a bit. It only took me like 2 more attempts after that, and he was down. And then every other boss after him has been just an absolute breeze, just because I've been blowing through them using Tempest Flurry as my primary attack. I've seen some since builds that have either used Tempest Flurry in combination with Charged Staff, and I think it's Ice Strike, or if you're going more the Cold Monk, the Frost Monk. But learning that process and understanding what that capability is, it was like a night and day difference. I've actually even tried to go and further critique my build to try to use chaos damage, a possible route of increasing my DPS. Now, granted, I am Alkalite of Chayula, so I want it to work. Let me put it that way. I want it to work so bad. I haven't figured it out yet. I'm still working on it. But the idea of it is that once I figured out the combination, of the monk and how to play it that way, it's been a breeze. The campaign has been an absolute cinch, and I'm about to get thrown into the end game mapping and I'm expecting a very, very positive response. We'll see. Checking in about a week. The idea of me being able to put that time into it and figure out the puzzle that is Path of Exile 2, and even in an extension, Path of Exile 1, putting in the time to understand what works and what doesn't work is what the beautiful thing is. That's why I think that this game is important, and that was the moment that the monk really clicked with me. I really liked the idea of being able to use Tempest Flurry in conjunction not only with charged staff, but then I also use Staggering Palm just because I like it as like a DPS kind of increase, because I've socketed it out with an armor break. So when I use it on a boss, it breaks their armor, it stuns them, heavy stuns them, and then I start shooting out all the projectiles in conjunction with the charge staff and the Tempest Bell and all those different things. It's a ton of damage very quickly. That's like my spike damage point right there in this build. Having said all that, it took me a while to understand what I needed to do to make this work. And I think that's kind of the point of what I'm enjoying the most about Path of Exile 2, is that if something doesn't work, you have to scale back and figure out what isn't working, what isn't pulling enough weight, what is the easiest way forward, what is going to make this build pop. And once I figured out how to use those abilities in combination, I understood the monk a heck of a lot better. I need to use these abilities in conjunction. I need to use them in a kind of like pattern sense. Now, since then, I've looked at like what the warrior can do, and then I've even seen some stuff from like the witch and the sorceress and all that. It seems like there is just this heavier emphasis, a lot more than I thought initially. I knew that there was combinations in the game, combining two different skills and having them work in conjunction. And I really thought about this and wanted to make this video because after I got through the Act 3 cruel version of the Molten Gold boss, it took me 2 attempts. That was it. 2 attempts, and he was done. And just the mentality and the thought process behind it was just it was like a revelation. So once that happened, the monk really clicked for me. I did also start to scale back some of the chaos damage that I was doing. I thought that I could make it work, and maybe I will try it as a different build later down the road. But as it stands right now, like I switched into more lightning damage, shocking, electrocuting enemies, so that I don't have to use either Siphoning Strike or Killing Palm, or Killing Palm, I think is what it is. Using these abilities with Combat Frenzy, and then I believe it's Power Resonance. Whatever the notable is, that changes Frenzy charges into power charges, which allows you to essentially keep charge staff uptime all the time, and all of your attacks are ranged now, which is really cool. It was this kind of like coming together that I really appreciated from the game. And as I've gone through and I've gotten better pieces of gear, I actually just got a staff that had like 14% increased attack speed, which is just phenomenal. It was this kind of like revelation, and I think that's where I believe that the monk really sat into it. It's like, oh man, this thing is really powerful. Now, I will be getting into the end game here soon, and I will be going ahead and trying out mapping and teetering with my build back and forth, trying to figure out what was. After that particular point, I did have to switch some things around to try to figure out how to use the charges efficiently and how to generate charges efficiently without having to use Siphoning Strike or Killing Palm. Trying to figure out how to generate those power charges without actually using one of those abilities. Once I figured that out and I kind of moved my build back and forth, it has worked phenomenally. Now, I do think that that kind of shows the point of this game, and it's something that I think is really, really a lot of fun. And I'm hopeful that when I try the other classes that I can figure out this as I go. But the idea of understanding that everything is a puzzle, and with us being able to respec fairly cheap, it makes it so much more engaging that I can go ahead and try this out without it really being a heavy penalty of me getting like orbs of regret. That was a pain. You could essentially brick your build up by like level 14 if you did it incorrectly, and then it's like such a process to undo it. My first time playing Path of Exile 1, I did a Thorns Templar. I had to switch to a Righteous Fire, but you get the point. It has been a lot of fun figuring this thing out and taking my time. And again, I like to read through the different skills. I don't like to blast through it. And I'm sure that the next time that I go through the leveling process, going through the campaign, it's going to be a lot faster because I have more working knowledge. But for anyone who may be watching this and is like, I don't know, the Path of Exile 2 looks really hard. I saw the passive tree. It looks very complex. It looks complex, but it really isn't. A lot of the information that's on there is very straightforward. It's, percentage increases or, these added effects or something small that's like that. And I recommend just giving the game a try because it really does have this moment where it's like, aha, and it's such a satisfying moment. That's exactly what happened with me when I played the monk. So if this video has done anything for you, it just shared my experience playing the monk, shared the idea that you can figure it out. If I can figure it out going slow as heck as I normally do, then you can figure this out. I did make a video recently talking about the recap of what Path of Exile 2 is doing differently and how it's kind of like shaking the industry, not only in ARPGs, but just in the gaming industry as a whole. And you can see that video here. Otherwise, stay caffeinated, folks.